Vine was laying on her bed in her night shorts and crop top, scrolling through reels on her phone in the dim light of her room. It was already well past midnight, and she was feeling both restless and relaxed at the same time. She couldn't help but let out a quiet yawn, and she continued to swipe through the endless stream of videos. Suddenly, she heard a soft rustling sound from her window. Her heart skipped a beat as she wondered what it could be. Slowly, she got off her bed and tiptoed towards the window, trying to see through the curtains. As she drew closer, the rustling sound grew wider, and she could see a faint shadow outside. Her heart was racing now, but she was also curious. She carefully pulled back the curtain and looked out, her eyes widening in surprise at what she saw. Standing outside her window was her fiance, Jungkook. He was trying to get in, but the window was slightly stuck. One could see the mischief in his eyes as he looked up at and saw her. Her initial shock quickly turned into curiosity. What was her fiance doing outside her window in the middle of the night? She watched as he struggled with the window, his hands trying to find a grip on the ledge. With a sigh, she walked over to the window and slowly opened it. Wine, what are you doing out here at this late hour? She asked in a low voice, looking down at Jungkook. He smiled up at her, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Jungkook, can't a man see his fiancée at any hour of the night? He replied, a smirk playing on his lips. She raised an eyebrow, not fully buying his excuse. Wine, it's past midnight, Jungkook. Couldn't this have waited until the morning? He stepped closer to the window, his eyes roaming over her body briefly. The sight of her in her night shorts and crop top was almost too much to handle. Jungkook, maybe, he said, his voice low and sluttery. But the more important question is, why are you wearing that? You know what it does to me? She couldn't help but roll her eyes, but there was a hint of a smile on her lips. Wine. I didn't exactly expect you to be sneaking into my house tonight, did I? She replied, leaning against the window sill. His eyes lingered on her midriff, her belly button, piercing, peeking out from the gap between her shorts and top. He was struggling to control his urge, but the sight of her was making it harder and harder. Jungkook, you know what else you didn't expect? He said, his gaze flicking up to meet hers. Me finding that little surprise you are hiding under there. Her eyes widened in surprise, realizing what he was referring to. She had almost forgotten about her belly button piercing. Blushing slightly, she crossed her arms over her stomach. Why, you were not supposed to see that, she said, her voice betraying a hint of embarrassment. His smile grew wider, his eyes darkening with desire. He could hear the blush in her voice, and it only fueled his need to be closer to her. Jungkook, too late, he said, his voice a low growl. I have already seen it, and now I want to see more. She gave him an unimpressed look, her eyes narrowing. When you were not supposed to see it yet, it was supposed to be surprised when you saw it. He feigned innocence, his gaze not leaving her body. Even though she was reprimanding him, he was too captivated by the sight of her bare midriff. Jungkook, it's not my fault, darling, Jungkook replied, his voice dripping with mock innocence. When you were trying on dresses in the morning, I saw it then. And you have no idea how much I had to control myself at that moment. He pushed himself up from the side of the window, his eyes locked onto hers. He walked towards her, closing the remaining distance between them in a few quick strides. He was now standing so close that she could feel the heat radiating off his body. She swallowed hard as she looked up at him, his proximity making her heart race. Her voice was shaky as she asked, "Why? So, why are you here?" Jungkook, you really have to ask, he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. I think the answer is right in front of you. Her breath hit at his words, the double meaning of them not lost on her. She tried to keep her composure, but it was getting increasingly difficult with him standing so close. He closed the remaining distance between them, their bodies now just inches apart. His eyes locked into hers, a hint of mischief in them. Jungkook, do you trust me, darling? He asked, his voice low and husky. She felt the heat of his body against her, her skin burning with desire. She hesitated for a moment, her heart racing in her chest. When, yes, she finally breathed it out, her voice barely above a whisper. He leaned in closer to her, his voice dropped to a low whisper. Jungkook, I know we haven't done much in terms of intimacy, and I respect that. He said, his hands coming up to caress her hips. But when I saw that piercing, it changed everything. I just had to come here to taste you, to play with it. Her body trembled under his touch, her breathing quickening. She had always known he desired her, but to hear him say it out loud like this made her feel a wave of heat wash over her. When Jungkook, she breathed it out, her voice filled with a mix of desire and question. We shouldn't not here. He chuckled softly, his hand continuing to caress her hips. Jungkook, don't worry, love. He said, his voice silky smooth. I don't intend to go further tonight. I just want to taste you, to play with your belly button piercing. I can wait for our wedding night for the rest. Her heart skipped a beat at his words, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. He scooped her up in his arm, lifting her effortlessly. Jungkook, can you let me play with it? He asked, his eyes sparkling with mischief. She gasped as he lifted her up, her heart racing with a mix of surprise and excitement. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and swallowed hard as she nodded, agreeing to his request. He smiled, his eyes fixated on her belly button piercing. He carried her to the bed and set her down gently, his hands immediately going to the waistband of her body. Her breathing grew heavy as he slightly slid her shorts for better view. Her body trembling with anticipation, she couldn't believe this was happening. But at the same time, she didn't want him to stop. He looked down at her, his eyes filled with love, and he kissed her forehead tenderly. Jungkook, I love you, he whispered, his voice filled with sincerity. Her heart swelled with emotion at his words, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lip. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing his jawline gently. Ryan, I love you too, she said softly, her voice filled with all the affection she had for him. And I trust you completely. His smile widened as he leaned down to kiss her belly button, the shiny piercing gleaming under the dim light. He then began to tease it with his tongue, tracing the edge of the ring and flicking at the stud. She let out a gasp, her body urging towards him involuntarily. The feeling of his tongue against her skin was sending electric shivers down her spine. She couldn't help but grip his shoulders tightly, her knuckles turning white. He smirked, obviously pleased with her reaction. He continued to play with the belly button, piercing, his tongue expertly teasing and caressing it. Every flick and movement sent waves of pleasure coursing through her body. When you're driving me crazy, she breathed out, her voice tremulous. Her hips lifted off to the bed, trying to get closer to his mouth, desperate for more of that sweet sensation. He looked up at her, a sly smile playing on his lips. Jungkook, if a little touch like this is already driving you crazy, I can't even imagine what you will be like on our first night. Her cheeks flushed at his words. She couldn't even begin to imagine what would happen on their wedding night if something as simple as this was already affecting her so much.